Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Hello everyone, welcome into Garden of Doom, and this week we have with us, this is probably going to drop as a bonus episode, is prior guest Bruce Fenton from the UK. How are you doing today, Bruce?
I'm doing very well, thank you for having me back. Yep, just enjoying a little bit of nice summer weather. We don't get enough of in the UK, so
right. And how's the baby doing? Still a baby or at toddler stage?
Yeah, she's just coming up towards 8 months now.
Oh,
so
still baby.
At that stage, crawl, starting to crawl and stuff. Yeah, quite fun. The more fun part, not just the bad sleep.
Right. Yeah, you're in the golden age. Is he doing equations yet?
He's a smart kid. I mean, he's come out with a few little words here and there, so he's quite early on that. So we'll see what happens. Maybe he's going to start outsmarting me pretty quick.
Oh, I would expect nothing less from your child to be already doing advanced research and doing saying calculus. Calculus is easy.
So if he comes in, I find him reading one of my books, and that'd be kind of intriguing.
Right. Yeah. So crossing out things and doing margin notes. So for those of you who don't know Bruce, he's been on the show previously. You should check out the prior episode, which was, I believe I called it Panspermia 780,000 BC, which is based on one of his theories. That's the closest way I could summarize it. But it's a very interesting show. It's a little bit longer than most of mine, but we couldn't cut it off because there was so much juice juice from that squeeze. So check that one out. He's also, for those of you who listen to Earth Ancients, at least for the past few years, you probably know his name because he has been and still occasionally is a contributor there. He was the science editor for some time, and you heard him almost weekly. So you can check out some of his work on Earth Ancients as well. But we have him here today, and I asked Bruce to comment on a bunch of stuff because I know he actively researches a whole lot of things, most of which have to do with outer space, ufology, and things like that, anthropology. But I've been really curious about what his thoughts are on what should be a first contact protocol. So I think we should start with that. So what are your thoughts on first contact protocols?
Yeah, no, this is an interesting topic. I mean, a couple of years back, I had a look at what exists out there as suggestions. And there, I think there's one group, the kind of an independent SETI post-detection task force, and they have this whole kind of list of organizations that you could, go to, like divisions of the UN, certain scientific organizations, political bodies, governments, and this, and the idea that you should first have a kind of a private outreach to scientists and these organizations and kind of prepare a strategy with different influential groups. And like some of this makes sense, to create kind of a strategy before going forward with a public release. Now, I mean, I think there's some sense to something like that. Because obviously none of us quite know what will happen. If there is an announcement on the TV, and it says, right, let's say an alien spaceship has been found crashed into, the Sahara Desert or somewhere, and they've got the video, there's pieces, the whole thing, it's a case closed, these aliens. That just goes straight onto TV. It's fair to say none of us know the full implications of that. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. There could be some negatives to it. We don't know how all the different religious groups will think about it. We don't know how different countries might view it as a threat. If one country has that kind of potential technology, could there be a military confrontation over it? So I do understand this idea that we would want ideally to have scientists maybe having a conversation with each other first, and then move on to some kind of discussion between governments and media organizations about how they would come forward with that. I do agree with that, but I think in reality it's probably not how it's going to happen, because there's so many people that are independently looking at the kind of aliens topic. We've got the Galileo project now, UAPs, and not just the traditional SETI Institute, and all that kind of side, but we've got independent people. So I don't think all of those organizations would necessarily go through that more conservative traditional channels. I think they're more likely to try and release their evidence or their discovery quite fast and kind of take the credit for what they've done. So my feeling is we're much more likely to end up in a kind of a very unknown waters. Yeah, the potential for something chaotic to happen. And I also think that maybe that's the right thing, that maybe we just have to just deal with it head on. If there is this, rather than having this in the background opportunity for other interests to perhaps water it down or to misdirect, because I don't necessarily trust a lot of the organizations that are being suggested to have those conversations, right? I don't really know. I think the UN are the best people, for example, to make any decisions in this. Also, some of the universities and stuff, I wouldn't fully trust to do it any better than the individuals making up their own mind. And then however you go about it, in the end, if you're going to come out with the truth, which you have to do, those issues are going to come up. Do you know what I mean? I don't think you can really get around it, that if you find evidence of aliens, it's going to have an impact in unknown ways, no matter how you go about preparing people. I think that's what we're seeing now, is perhaps in the wider context of these topics, is some level of preparation anyway. We've seen media and scientific organizations moving towards a sensible discussion about aliens. We could argue that we're already in a kind of a process of preparing the wider public. I think that is somewhat true, that whether they know they're there or not, it does seem there's a kind of testing the waters to prepare us to see how people react. So I think that's kind of happening already anyway. So maybe that has a positive influence. Maybe people are a little bit more ready because of the way that they've seen the media shift and the way they've seen scientists, some scientists at least, starting to talk more seriously about the possibility of aliens in our solar system, not just millions of miles away. And also, of course, TV and Hollywood and all that have been doing this for quite a long time, giving us scenarios of what it would be like if aliens were here. So I'd say a lot of that preparation's already happened anyway. So it's almost at a point where I don't think there's much more spinning it around we can do. I think it's going to be a case of presenting it in an honest way and allowing people to process it as they will, and we can't control whether there's some kind of military vying over the debris. I don't think that's going to be in the control of the average person. We would just have to hope that negotiations, between different groups to share science, would happen.
I agree with you. I had Reverend Jim Willis on a bit ago, and I know you're acquainted with him or familiar with him. And he said he doesn't really think it matters because whoever the aliens are, if they are interstellar or intrastellar, either way, they're far and away technologically more advanced than we are, and they're going to dictate the first contact. It's probably not their first rodeo, and there's a lot of sense to that. But I still think it makes sense for governments and scientists and philosophers, whoever, to game plan. I mean, that's what, if you don't have, somebody used to say a failure to plan is a plan for failure, and they're right. And there is also, people make plans and God laughs, and there's something to that as well, which, I think is sort of what you're saying. But at least the plan is a lifeline. It's sort of like a box that you can color within. And it may not be relevant given the circumstances, but hopefully it's something that's adaptable enough. But I think that if the first contact is, and I hate to use sci-fi analogies, but I don't really know what else to do, but sort of like in Star Trek, or the original Star Trek, when, the mythos of it, when, Earth interstellar, craft encountered the Vulcans. The Vulcans were, probably 100 years ahead of us in technology or something like that, but not thousands of years ahead of us in technology.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I think it's thousands of years, there's no point. Reverend Willis is right. They're going to dictate the terms of first contact, or they're going to eradicate us and we won't ever see it coming. But if it's like a first contact, like, and again, I hate to use this, like a colonial era, but, like the Spaniards coming to the Aztecs, there's, a lot of technology between them, but, it's not, had the Aztecs or the Mayas, reacted differently, they could have, knocked them out easily, or at least over a battle of attrition. So that's probably the most likely scenario that I'd look to. And the military has a part to play in it, but I don't think they're the only, and neither are religious. I mean, I think religious has to sort of take a backseat because there's so many different religions. I mean, if anything, you have to find sort of like some sort of shamanic, or, I mean, you have to find sort of like somewhere on the spectrum between Gnostics and shamans to find what's closest to sort of the basic universal truths of all religions. I don't know, but I mean,
I think that although I said it could potentially be, some, upheavals in terms of, the military view on things, or the religious, I tend to believe that it would be such a big, unknown, such a big question and event that most people, including most organizations, institutions, and, armies, would just have a pause where they'd really be wanting to just figure out what is happening, who is this, what is this. I'd be surprised if there was a lot of, inter-group fighting whilst not knowing what this other wants, what this other is doing. So I tend to think we probably wouldn't have as much chaos as is sometimes suggested. I do think that, at least for a while, there'd be a bit of a pause while everybody just wanted to work out, what is this, what's happening, what do we do next? And then all that other argument would probably come a bit later. Also, I think that most militaries, not just military, I think a lot of institutions as well would be looking again at what we have that may suggest past contact. You'd be looking through all your archives of data, looking through any discoveries we've made, looking through any debris. Could that have been alien technology? Could we have had these contacts before? I think there'd be a lot of that going on. Scientists looking through with a new eye, saying, well, before we didn't know this was real, now we do. What about all these accounts people have said of artifacts or of contact events? I imagine there'd be an awful lot of data scientists crunching through archives of information, trying to see if we had anything that would help us understand who these others were and what their interests were in our planet. And that might not be done in a universal, unified way. Maybe Russia would do their own thing, the US their own thing, China. There might be some loose collaboration, but even so, I don't think it would go straight to fighting between groups. I don't think that religions would really want to stir the pot any more than it would be. They'd be trying to calm down their followers and give them some sense of understanding from the perspective of each religion's doctrines and dogma. Because of course people are going to be looking for answers. So I tend to think it might be a lot a lot calmer than has been, painted by some people as being this really crazy upset. I think it might cause a lot of inner calm and contemplation and discussion as a first point.
Or inner panic. But I do agree with you that I think the world would sort of hit pause. I mean, because no one would quite know what to do. And, I think the very religious would have to, question their religions, and the very, very religious would, try to confirm their beliefs. But I don't know, what anyone would do about it. But if Bruce Fenton was emperor of the world for that day, what would your first contact protocols be? How would you approach it? Let's just say that we knew that there was a ship or 3 ships or whatever. Let's say it wasn't an obvious invasion force. Could be wrong because of the technology, but let's say, and it's just sitting there, hasn't taken out the ISS, hasn't taken out satellites, it's just sitting there. And so you decide, hey, I'm emperor of the world. I want to make contact. I want to say, we prefer to be friends rather than enemies, but we're not pushovers either, or whatever your message is. How would you recommend, what would your list of, your bullet point list be? In other words, what would your first contact the Fenton first contact protocols?
I think, to be honest, the first thing I would do is order the complete stand down militarily. And I'd want that to be absolutely enforced, that there was no signs that we intend to make any, military moves against them. And the reasoning would be that, if they have weaponry, we assume, we can't know that they don't have, anyone that can sit off the, just outside orbit and fire on us has already won. It's like the idea of being on, a small island, and you're attacked by a fleet of armed Navy vessels, and they can just fire on you from out of range at sea and just pulverize your island. Do you at that point really? The only thing you can do is wave a white flag, open negotiations, right? Because there's no way that we can really fight against a fleet that can sit just outside of our range of anything we have and just fire on us or launch asteroids down at us, which is, again, these kind of, the potential there is for a full eradication of our planet down to where perhaps even microbial life has been sterilized, and so I really don't see, although we have a lot of movies that suggest that we can put up a fight. I mean, that, yes, if there was a ground invasion, we saw ships landing and beings were getting out, and, as we see in some of these movies, but if they're just sitting there in ships, or just outside orbit, and they're not doing anything, I think you're in a scenario where, well, look, if they do open fire, so from there, we don't have anything that can fight back. So it's such an imbalance at that point that you have to go fully with the show of, look, we are not interested in fighting. We are not interested at all,
Right.
So that would be the first thing. I think secondly, you would absolutely be working with all of the experts in communications technologies, every frequency, every piece of equipment, every linguist, every expert in psychology, anyone who's ever pondered these questions, all the exobiologists and all the, all of these guys in the astrobiology universities, you'd want all these people talking, getting the very best kind of plan in place for how we could launch a kind of an attempt at interaction, assuming we haven't heard anything, that a way in which everyone kind of agrees is going to be non-threatening and, and includes universal kind of frequencies that we can send a message on, and just make it very clear that we are open to talking, and that would be it. I wouldn't want to say too much. I don't think we'd want to give away much. I don't think we want to say the wrong thing. So I think I'd be very careful with just making it, if we can, clear that we are not interested in military engagement and we are open to talk, and then wait for some kind of response, because I think the less we say, the better. The more chance of us doing something that triggers a problem.
Yeah, it's funny because I keep thinking to Babylon 5 when the humans encountered the Minbari for the first time, and the humans' sign of we don't mean you any harm is to keep the gun ports closed, and the Minbari form of "we don't mean you any harm" was to open the gun ports to show you their hand, to show you exactly what they had, and it's obviously the exact opposite. Anyway,
It's
but
a problem because we won't know how an alien thinks, and no matter how many times we've seen these, ideas either in Hollywood or in discussions with people who purport to have had contact. If you listen to that, most of those reports are very different. So you can't take away from it any certainty in how we want to present ourselves, and that's really a problem. And if you think about it as well, I wrote about this in my book Exogenesis, that there could be beings who communicate through color or through smells or through some kind of pheromones they give out. I mean, we really don't know what we'd be dealing with at all.
Right, and color is a construct of our brains. I mean, dogs see black and white, insects see in different colors. I mean, the James Webb satellite, interprets different colors than what we see. Yeah. So, we could put green as for peaceful, but green to them could mean game on. So,
absolutely, absolutely. It's really that wild, and I think because we've been shown this Hollywood imagery that most people have what I think is a woefully inadequate view of how crazy that first contact would be, because we tend to see very human-like alien behavior, whereas if we think of this planet and we think of the different ways animals behave and communicate and reproduce and all that stuff, even there we see things that are super alien to the way humans behave, right? And we've got to think we're going to be much closer to any animal on this planet than to aliens that come here. Well, that's the most likely. We might get lucky,
sure.
Some aliens are a bit like us, but it could potentially be something that's just unthinkable to us.
What are your thoughts on sending math or physics equations, which are in essence math? Math and music, they say, are the universal language, but I mean, math is probably the only objective one. So maybe just sending math equations, to show that we're intelligent. And I don't know if there's math equations that somehow say, we're peaceful. At least it says we're intelligent and we're sentient. And maybe then after that, sending what we think is peaceful music, like Brahms' Lullaby or something, so something that is very unlikely, but even that is risky as a first message because you never know. So I'm thinking that the math and then some calming music, some mellow classical music might be nice, maybe then with some imagery of doves or babies or kittens or something, that might be, the way to go. But I think maybe start with math, whether it's scientific equations or otherwise.
Probably so. It's probably about the least offensive kind of we do is just hope that we can display the idea that we have intelligence and that, that we do contemplate the big questions of the universe, because that might at least give a sense that, we are a thinking species that's worth having a conversation with. And that is probably one of the few ways that we can bring that across without much baggage from us as a species. But at some point, if we do open communication, it's going to get very difficult, very chaotic, because you say we have to navigate that minefield the whole way through communication of not saying something that either makes them think that it's not worth having the conversation, or that we in some way upset them, assuming they can have emotions, that we in some way we offend them or give them cause to think that we're a problem. And you only have to look at the reality of our history, our culture, and our societies. It would be very hard to avoid the fact that we are a military-minded kind of creature, that we have a violent streak. And you could even say, would it look more suspicious as keeping that quiet whilst there's obvious signs of it on our planet's surface? You know what I mean? So it's kind of really tricky balance, because at what point do we say, yes, we also, we do fight each other, and we kill each other, and we have all these weapons, and, at some point.
Oh yeah, at some point. I don't know that I would open with that. I mean, maybe then I'd send, since English is the international language of travel, and transportation, I think I'd send, maybe the alphabet, and then underneath that, send that first individually, then underneath that have the word Earth, and then equals, and then the picture of Earth from the vantage point they're seeing. And, that from there, I think they could construct the language if they haven't already. And, I think beyond that, I think it would be up to them. But yeah, I have to believe that if they can navigate the cosmos, that they've already scanned and they know that we have a military capability. And like you said, everything's stand down. That, I mean, the ships will be there, the planes will be on the ground. They know that they're there. I guess the biggest question is, doesn't matter whether your subs, come to surface or not, because they can probably scan those too. And does it help to show them or not? I don't know. I would probably just leave them where they are. I probably wouldn't have anyone move to the extent that ships can remain static.
And the other thing I think is, I would hope in a first contact scenario that, our best case, of course, if you look at certainly in the claims in the, I guess in the public of people who say they've had contact, the side of psychical contacts, I mean, that would be kind of an ideal, if a species were to or is trying to communicate with us on a mind-to-mind level, because of course then there's less room for an error in communication. So I think contact with a species that could in some way use telepathy is kind of an ideal. The others to me is to make contact via a probe, something like that, where you haven't got crafts nearby. You're just dealing with an intelligent probe that's been sent out to look for life and is able to communicate. I mean, that's kind of an ideal contact scenario where, there's no particular danger for us. The species that sent it is probably very far away, but it tells us, that aliens are real. They're looking for other life. They're making contact, and we can get a first contact opened up with this probe, which will then report back. So we could probably have a bit more comfortable, kind of opening contact if there's a bit of distance between us and the species itself. So whether that's, some way of communicating mind to mind, or some way of communicating through, it's like a third party, it's emissary, if you like, that it's sent out, rather than this thing of where everyone would be kind of worrying, what's that fleet doing up there? What's it going to do? Obviously, that's
right.
A panicking kind of scenario, isn't it? I mean, it can be very hard to keep people calm if they can kind of see these vast cruisers hovering. I mean, that to me is probably the most unideal kind of contact. Is the ships have already pulled in from orbit,
Right.
Really, I mean, sometimes I love that idea, seeing ships in the sky, but I think it's probably the worst case scenario for kind of a contact.
Right. That's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where there's already a fleet of space bulldozers here. Yeah, it's a little bit late for Carl Sagan's placard on Voyager.
Sure.
All right, so I think we've covered that one. All right, but what I know that you really keep up on UFOlogy and scientific tracking, which they're almost one and the same at this point. So what news and notes should we know about that have occurred in the last 3 to 6 months or so, and should we be looking for in the near future that you are aware of that probably most people aren't?
Well, I suppose one of the interesting developments, of course, is that at least in the US, there's been further moves towards establishing official departments that will look at what most of us would refer to as UFOs, but these UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena and unidentified flying objects, which they seem to have kind of blended together somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, those terms to me don't necessarily indicate the same thing, because of course an unidentified flying object, we would think of as physical, some sort of physical structured something that is flying around in the air, whereas an unidentified aerial phenomena, could potentially include all kinds of energetic phenomena, right?
Ball lightning, borealis, solar flares, even, if you want to call it, you could call it the, comet tails, or, like the Taurids. I understand what you're saying.
I think that's deliberate. I think that's why they've gone that way, is because if you look at some of the NASA emails, some of the private emails that have been released through Freedom of Information, the conversations there have included ball lightning and stuff. So, I mean, they have kind of said, do we make part of this study, a focus on understanding, what ball lightning is, for example? And that makes sense. I mean, it does. I know a lot of people won't like that because they hear that kind of snarky remark, UFOs are just ball lightning. But I don't think they should really think that way, because we don't know what ball lightning is, right? It is super interesting. I think it's a super interesting topic. I would love to see NASA actually bother to look. I mean, because we know it exists. and nobody knows what it is, and it's up there in the sky, right? We could also learn something, because if there is a phenomena here which seems to be able to form balls of energy that can fly through matter, through buildings, inside houses and stuff, and fly around, seemingly almost conscious, interacting, looking like it explores buildings, and all kinds of really weird stuff has been reported with ball lightning. Like, considering we really don't know if it is lightning, that's just a name, a placeholder that's being put on it. What if that turns out to actually be either some kind of life that we can't yet conceive of, or is actually alien probes of some sort that we can't understand, that they are able to project, energy into spheres and use them to explore our environment. So I think we've perhaps seen that topic kind of really glazed over in the past. So I was kind of glad to see them say that. And that also makes sense of why they're saying, UAP. Again, I think that they're part of what they're going to look for is upper atmosphere, energetic phenomena. I think that's definitely in there, that they suspect that at least some of what's being reported is going to fall into that kind of category. And I don't think that's a bad thing, that, if we discover a few new terrestrial phenomena that may also teach us something that could allow building, new technologies, or in some way changing the way our technology functions. I think there's potential there for something amazing to be discovered. But of course, alongside that, there's other phenomena that seems to be physical and would probably gel well with the UFO header better. Certainly there's many reports of what sound like craft, right? Whether some of those may be secret military projects, we get that. Yeah, sure. I expect some are. But if even one is an alien probe or an alien craft, we want to know about that. So I absolutely think we need to be looking again at that to see whether there's anything. So I think that NASA, and of course, the Galileo project as well, they're kind of looking at it with that view, is that they're not necessarily expecting there to be any alien technologies here, but they do know there's discoveries to be made up there. And second to that, they're open-minded to the possibility that there could be alien probes exploring our solar system, right? Which is a legitimate field.
Well, maybe we should back up a little bit and tell people what the Galileo project is. I believe Matt Williams talked about it on one of the Garden Views shows. If I understand correctly, Galileo project is the one that's being headed, or spearheaded anyway, by Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard, who found, or was with the group that found Oumuamua. I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly. I'm sure I'm not. So I think he's doing it in partnership. It's like a private-public partnership.
Yeah. So I think he's collaborating still with the Harvard University, because they have put together a team, and there's quite a few scientists. I don't know the total number now. They look like there was, I think, a couple of dozen or so scientists are collaborating with Avi Loeb at this point. Plus, non-academics. There's a whole list of people who actually know more for the UFO field, and certainly some who are kind of, I guess, quite strong advocates of the UFO topic that have become, collaborators in that project or advisors to it. So it's quite interesting, the mix of people. And then, of course, it's also working with Harvard. So they've built an initial detector system, which is on the roof of the university at this point, and that's going to be kind of a multi-spectrum detector and telescope that can record, anything going over. And they want to use AI and stuff to filter out teach it to filter out birds and planes and balloons, and so that it will learn to discount known terrestrial phenomena. And so, but it will also be recording, whatever goes over. And so there's the potential there with these kind of devices, particularly if they're rolled out in a network, that these could actually make some really interesting discoveries. And I'm not sure if people are aware, but it was also said that although at the moment it's on the roof of the university, it's not planned to stay there. That's just the test stage. So the next thing they want to do is place these in kind of hotspots, places where interesting things are being reported on a somewhat regular basis. And I think that's a really interesting update that people may not be aware of, because, of course, that you start to think, well, yeah, of course, there's a few areas around the world where people are regularly reporting what we think of as UFOs or anomalous aerial phenomena of some sort. If you can put these detectors in the right places, well, this starts to become very interesting, because we may then be looking at a fairly quick turnover of discoveries, rather than waiting for something to pass over Harvard University's roof, which of course is like win the lottery or something. If you can put the things out there into places where there's regular reports of strange phenomena, well then, yeah, that would be awesome. What they really need, there is more of these, because I think it's just one or two that they've built at this point. So I'm hopeful they'll do more of that. They also agreed that they will do publicly. That's an important note to make. And they're not going to partner with the military or with any classified or rely on any secret classified data. They want to do this all in terms of public science. So that's really key. Of course, that's not going to be what we see with the government's attempts at this, which I believe they've got this sort of anomalous research office or something. I don't know the exact name that they've come with at this point. I'm not sure if you do, but I know it's something like the Anomaly Research Bureau or something.
Yeah.
I'd have to double check that. But obviously the US government have renamed the department a couple of times now since they've got into this topic.
And then they've got to decide who's in charge. Is it NASA? Is it Space Force? Is it the Air Force? Is it the intelligence? I'm sure they'll have they'll probably have some sort of lieutenant colonel from every division and like 2 scientists.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because they keep saying they're creating these departments. There was one department, and then it's been rolled into another one, and now it's a third one. So at the moment, they still seem to be uncertain about branding. What is this going to look like? What is this department going to look like? Like I said, who's going to head it? What exactly is it doing? What is it looking for? How is it going to go about operating? Is it going to look at any of the past cases? I think they've just decided that it will look at reports and information going back to the 40s, which obviously a lot of people got excited about because that takes it back to the era of Roswell.
Blue Book and all that.
Yeah. I mean,
Project Blue Book.
Chewie's looking at that, though, isn't it? I'm not sure if that's a good thing because most of that story arc from Roswell to now is so mythologized and so murky that I don't think they're going to do any better than the dedicated researchers of the UFO topic to be able to sieve out the good stuff from that. I think most of that work's been done.
Well, unless they have access to classified documents that haven't been made public. But yeah, I generally agree with you. In the last 75 years since Roswell, I'm not sure that there's going to be anything new to come out of that isn't already known. I remember hearing Professor Loeb not too long ago basically suggesting we needed a bunch of long distance telescopes, basically pointed in more or less the same direction that the Oumuamua was detected, because where there's one piece of debris, there's probably lots, and before we were looking for a needle in a haystack. Well, now we know what needles might look like, and we know what part of the haystack to look at. So let's do that. Let's not look all 360 degrees. Let's look in this 2 or 3 degree area and see what comes our way. Because if something broke apart, that it was likely not just one part, and chances are it's coming the same direction. So I don't know if that's the general plan, but because the cosmos is astronomically huge, beyond our comprehension. So I mean, I guess that seems like as good an idea as any. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm really interested in the interstellar objects topic. I think that's an area of new area of science that has massive potential to make incredible discoveries. So I'm with him on that. I think that certainly part of that should be looking back down the kind of the path of Oumuamua, and also of any other interstellar objects that we detect, right? So we know that we've had Comet Borislav as well, which came throughout the solar system, and also they have just recently confirmed an object that burnt up, well, most of it burnt up over Papua New Guinea, or just off the northeast coast of Papua New Guinea. That hasn't been given an official name. It's got like a number for the date and everything. But basically, it was a small bolide that I think exploded, and parts of it they think survived to shower into the ocean there. So he's looking into the potential of whether or not that could be a probe. And I think most people know as well that Oumuamua, that's been theorized by Harry Loeb and also some others to potentially be an alien probe or defunct alien technology of some sort.
A solar sail.
Yeah, like a solar sail or something like that, they suspect. Although it's interesting that they describe it being probably disc-like. I think that, of course, made a lot of people think, because obviously we've had years and years of hearing about flying saucers. So then the idea of a highly reflective disc-like metal object coming from outside of our solar system and then sort of accelerating away from the sun. I think more than one person sat there and wondered, is that some kind of flying saucer that has come through and, maybe was damaged or whatever, and has just happened to float through right on the plane of the solar system between Earth and Mars, the two habitable planets, which again is kind of uncanny, that it just happens to go right through that part of our solar system. So that could be something like that. And I guess that's not lost on him either. So there's a few different reasons why Oumuamua was strange. I mean, that's a couple of them. But yeah, so we've had two objects from outside the solar system that both have, aspects to them that are anomalous enough to make a guy like Avi Loeb, obviously he was a highly respected scientist. There's enough there to make him question, could two of those three potentially be alien probes? I think that's quite amazing if anyone thinks about that. So 66% of the known interstellar objects already have been theorized to maybe be technology. Now, if you zoom out a little bit on that, the obvious question then is, well then, how many of these things are coming through our solar system, right? Because if there's potential for some of them to be technology, we want to know how many there are and start looking at those, right? Start looking for them. And a study was done very recently, and they have come to the conclusion that we should have around 7 interstellar objects go through the inner solar system, so near enough for us to kind of notice them, maybe even to send a probe. We should have 7 every year. And I think that's quite a lot. And if you extrapolate that out, over the timeline of since Earth formed, basically 4.5 billion years, that you've got some 30-odd billion interstellar objects have passed this way. Of course, some of those are going to crash onto, maybe the moon, the Earth, other planets. Mm-hmm. Some of them may end up in orbits around planets, as like mini moons, or just derelict floating around the solar system. So we then have to think, well, look, if 2 of them so far were strange enough to be targets for maybe alien technology, then we would guess that quite a lot of the other ones also would have anomalies that may suggest that and make them very interesting. So I think that's why we're going to start seeing more focus on these interstellar objects as probably either the primary or secondary target for all of these groups that are looking into anomalous visitation and all this stuff. That I think the military are interested. I think obviously Avi Loeb and his team are interested. I expect NASA are going to be very interested in that, because it starts to open another question. We used to think about the Drake equation, this idea, that calculating, how much light should be out there, where it should be, and why don't we see anything? The big mystery of, well, why don't we? If life is common in the solar system, in the universe, why don't we see it?
Right, Fermi, right? The Fermi.
Yeah, so the Fermi paradox, right? So so why don't we see it? So the thing is that well, now we know that we've been missing probably at least 7 interstellar objects every year. So if those were alien probes, then it's not the fact that stuff isn't out there, it's we were unable to notice it. So now we have a new part to the equation, that we've been missing 7 interstellar objects a year, and that any number of those could be alien technology. And also that infers that if there's 7 a year, right, then there's basically an unbelievable number of these things out in between stars, right?
Oh, sure.
So we used to think maybe there wasn't much passing between stars because of these huge distances. The idea that we're getting so many of these coming in through here changes this picture dramatically. So now we're thinking either interstellar space is full of objects, and that's why we're seeing quite a few of them passing our way, or most of them are directed. That means that they're technology, they're probes. So either of those really changes the game on this potential to find life passing through our solar system in some form, or intelligence. So I think that's where the big discoveries are likely to come, is in the interstellar object topic. That's why we're seeing a lot of focus now. More studies are being published. And another, I don't see very quickly like that on. There's another one that's just come out where they're saying that they want to look for craters on the planets in the solar system that have a lot of melt glass in them, because interstellar objects travel faster than normal asteroids.
You read my mind, because I was about to ask you about all the melt glass, because I know that's a big part of your book, Exogenesis, where you noted that there was like 10,000 miles of basically nuclear glass sort of between South Central Asia, basically down to Australia.
Well, yeah, this is kind of intriguing, because they've realized that if an interstellar object impacts a planetary surface, it will be traveling a lot faster than asteroids and comets that exist within our solar system, because those obviously they have a speed that's limited by the sun's gravity. You know, they're all in motion around the sun, so they have an upper limit of their speed. These objects coming in from outside the solar system, these all come in very fast, and that's why we know that Oumuamua and Borislav and this other asteroid were from outside the solar system, because of the speeds that involved. So when these impact, they will form craters that have way more melt glass, melted material, for the size of the crater than you'd see for other craters, right? So you can say, okay, we've got a 10-mile crater here, 10-mile crater here, but this one's got twice as much melt in it. So whatever did this was traveling a heck of a lot faster. And so that's going to be really interesting. Of course, yeah, that dovetails to my own work, where I'm saying that, look, you know, we have all this anomalous melt glass for 5 what we call strewn fields, tektite strewn fields on the planet. We have one over in the US. We have, actually, in some ways, it's questionable if it's 1 or 2, but we have the Georgia sites and I think Bedia sites. See, in the US, I think some down in Florida and in that area, some it's found. But there's that's all supposedly is related to. There's an enormous crater at. Gone by my mind now, but there's an absolutely vast crater. I think it's like 100-mile cross crater somewhere over in that direction, and they associate it with that. But there's a lot of tektite material there. You've got Ivory Coast tektites, obviously Ivory Coast, Africa. You've got a strewn field there. You've got the Moldavite tektite strewn field and Germany, and then you've got, of course, the Australasian tektite strewn field that I deal with, and a lesser known, more recently discovered one in Central America. Where there's a smaller tektite strewn field. And so the funny thing there is, of course, is that you've got only 5 of these anywhere on Earth from any time that we know of since the beginning of this planet. So if you find only 5 of anything on this planet, you're dealing with anomalous material, right? Because we've had plenty of time with lots of asteroids and comets and everything hitting this planet. So why do we only see 5 tektite strewn fields? And that is something that people should straight away think is kind of strange, because it's been sold to the public as essentially asteroid impact melt glass. But then when you look closer at that, you say, hang on a minute, this glass is very different to that seen at all the other impact sites. And again, it's never found in a crater. Right? These associations with craters are tentative at best, that they found craters they think could be associated with it. And that's very different to finding melt glass in a crater and saying, well, look, it's in the crater. It's got the same chemical composition of the rock of the crater. And that is the typical scenario, that the glass is almost identical chemically to the rock in the crater. Makes sense, doesn't it, really? Sure. Yeah, and then on top of that, the glass is extremely foamy, and that is you've got lots of bubbles in it, because when you get a high energy event, that is a short duration, what happens is the rock melts, the material in it, chemicals in it are turned to gases that start bubbling out. But because the energy event is very quick, then the rock starts cooling very fast. And so the bubbles become trapped in the glass. And so you end up with this really foamy glass. And the same is seen when we do nuclear detonations and nuclear testing, right? You get the very foamy nuclear glasses that are produced, right, in deserts and stuff. So also, I think you can actually buy some online. There's samples, you can see that. But these kinds of glasses are very similar. So nuclear melt glass and asteroid impact glass looks very, very similar. Now, there's something very different with tektites, and that's that immediately you find that they are completely unlike that. They don't have this foaminess. They are instead what's called very homogeneous, i.e. their chemicals are very well mixed, and also they're highly fined. And fining is like the process we use to remove bubbles from glasses. So, when you buy glass tableware, you don't see lots of bubbles and stuff in it, right? That wouldn't be sold. It's not strong enough. That would be a problem. So we have a process called fining, where obviously you're mixing this. You're mixing the original materials. You're melting them over time, and you're bubbling off this unwanted volatiles. So those will be released, and then when that glass is what we call fined to the correct standards, you cool it, right? And that's what appears to have happened with tektite. That's a problem, because if we're saying it's been formed in the same manner as other impact glasses, then it should not look like that. It should be very foamy. It should have all the same chemical characteristics as the rock, and it should have partly melted rock in it.
So it formed too quickly is basically what you're saying.
It shouldn't be like, you see, it seems like it's gone through a long process, but it could only have been in a short process.
Right.
And so that doesn't make sense. So in other words, that starts indicating that the parent rock is if we say glasses are like their parent material, right? So as we said, an asteroid impacts, we're going to find that the glass in the crater is very similar to the rock. Okay, so tektite must be similar to its parent material.
Mm-hmm.
So if the tektite is very fine and homogeneous, and that hasn't had time to occur during an impact, that means the parent was fine and homogeneous.
What does the word tektite mean?
Tektite basically, as an introduction to specifically for it comes from the word tektos, which I think is to mean melted. I think it's a Greek word. It's taken back, but tektites are a very specific type of glass. They say just from these 5 sites in the world. I think that name, it was one of the researchers who first looked into it about 130 years ago or something like that, and he came up with that as the name for them. But essentially, it's this very specific type of melt glass.
Okay.
And so it's that aspect of it is quite mind-bending to a lot of the academic community. And that's why there's been a mystery around it for a long time, because they have to explain how that glass seems to have gone through a long process to make it into a kind of a quality, bubble-free glass without partly melted material. It doesn't have pieces of rock in it. It doesn't have, part melt. It doesn't have organic inclusions like soil and stuff, which you see in impact glass. So all of that's missing. So in other words, it looks as though the parent was already a kind of fine, homogeneous material. Now, we don't know of any asteroids or comets that are like that. So straight away, then you're dealing with an anomalous parent object. Because if we're going to say that is just impact glass, it's a big problem. And that's why for many years, this is almost 200 years of debate has been going on about these tektite glasses, right? In fact, the first kind of scientific writings on the Australasian tektites, which I write about, which I'm particularly interested in. The first writing on that came to public awareness was from Charles Darwin, which is kind of funny that he actually wrote a piece on a small chunk that he was given when he was in Australia, and that appeared in one of his texts from his voyages, which is kind of interesting. And he thought it was some kind of volcanic glass,
sure,
because volcanic glasses also have this fining process. But again, because volcanic glass forms in a caldera, right? Mm-hmm. So material is melted, it's in a caldera, it's heated over a period of time, it's mixing, swirling, heated, and so that has time for volatile materials to bubble off and for the different chemicals to become very well mixed, the different kinds of rock and stuff, they become very well mixed in that caldera. As that produces what we think of as quite a good quality glass that's been, well mixed and well fined. And so that is very similar to tektites. And so for quite a while, one of the theories was it must be volcanic glass, either thrown out from some giant super volcano on Earth, or maybe thrown out by a huge volcano on the moon, and that this volcanic glass had showered down from the moon.
Yeah, that seems unlikely based on all the geology it's covered. But I don't want to insult any of the geologists or actual scientists out there with the simplicity of this question. But the glass, this tektite glass, it couldn't possibly be the material itself that came from the interstellar object.
Yes, it could be. Yes.
Oh, it could be. So okay.
Yes,
so
because the other issue we have here is that, particularly say with the Australasian tektite, and also we touched on the fact that none of these tektites are found in craters, right? Now, I focus on the Australasian tektite stream for one particular reason, and that's that some of the tektite is shaped aerodynamically from entry from space. So there was, for many years, a lot of NASA scientists saying that this has to have come in from space, and that the only explanation they have was either it coming from the moon, and I'd say either from a volcano on the moon, or an impact that hit a volcano on the moon and launched volcanic glass, or in some way, some object that was glassy, that was in orbit around Earth, and that then broke apart, somehow, exploded, broke apart, and that then the debris continued on in an orbital path at angles almost horizontal to the plane of the Earth, and came in at these very gentle angles, allowing time for these pieces, and they were spherical pieces, so they'd formed in vacuum. So obviously liquid in a vacuum will take a spherical shape, so they know that these spheres had to have formed in a vacuum, so in space, and then they've come in at these very gentle angles that suggest that the parent was orbiting the Earth, and as they came in, they had secondary melting, and so the front edge, the liquefied, and it ran back, and you get these almost bullet-shaped fronts, right? So they know that they came in at these gentle angles. Most of them fell across southern Australia. So, in other words, if these are not from an impact, if they are from an object that entered into orbit and then broke up, then that suggests they must be the direct debris from that object, not material produced during an impact of some object, but debris from the object itself. And that is super interesting, because then that would place it as the only known interstellar object debris that we can pick up in our hands and study.
Okay, let me fantasize a little bit here. If that theory is correct, which is one that I just sort of stumbled upon, or you had said it and I just didn't understand what you were saying and came upon it, is it possible that some government, probably the U.S., has agreed and found a way to make this technology movable? And those might be the Tic Tacs that we're seeing, is Tic Tac glass drones, so to speak?
Well, I think that a material scientist, if they knew that that was from an alien object, maybe an alien craft, that they could potentially learn something amazing from the composition of it, right? The different chemicals that are in it. Like, why would it be the specific mix of chemicals that it is? So for somebody who works in that field, either designing technologies or working in materials engineering, I imagine they'd be very, very interested in understanding what chemicals go into an alien craft, right? What mix and probe, whatever it is. They would be looking very closely at that, and that could tell them something that you and I wouldn't understand. Right? I could look through those list of chemicals and think, well, why? I wouldn't know why to use them. But if you worked in those fields, there's certainly potential there that maybe somebody did make a discovery from that and thought, well, hang on a minute, if we use these chemicals, that would have this particular benefit, right? So there's also, and this is a bit wilder, when you look at the path of the debris and other parts of this story, there is the possibility that maybe something survived that stage of melt and destruction. And that's because we know that this, from tracing back the debris, finding where it went furthest and hottest, back to where it's most likely to have actually broke apart, it appears that the initial event was probably high above Southeast Asia or Indochina. Right, but the debris field moves down sort of southward across Australasia, and the final edges of it are in Antarctica. Now, this is dated to 788,000 years ago, this event. But the funny thing is, a few years back, scientists realized that there were magnetic anomalies in Antarctica that suggested something large had broken up into 5 pieces and gone into the ice, and that this left one of these chunks made a hole in the ice 200 miles by 200 miles. I mean, so whatever that was enormous. And that there's 5 anomalous signatures there that date to around 780,000 years ago. So if you trace that debris field from where it exploded downwards, I mean, it leaves you that question. Did a large chunk of that original object bury itself deep in the ice in Antarctica? And then you open up a whole mess of conspiracies.
Oh, sure. Yeah, excellent.
Because we've all heard about ideas there's something going on down in Antarctica, and that there's a lot of secrecy around Antarctica, and there's been rumors of archaeological discoveries of some kind of technology down there. Obviously it opens up a door of conspiracies and
I'd love to do a show on that. Maybe you'll be my guest for that one. I have one observation.
That? I mean, that part is potential that something was found that's not melted.
Sure. No, I love it. one observation and then one question. And the observation, it's interesting that went over Indochina, and we have 5 around the world. I don't know. The number 5 is so important in Chinese and Eastern religion, martial arts, philosophy, magic. I mean, it's sort of all wrapped into one in China, especially. I don't know if it's probably just a coincidence, but the question is, this type of tektite glass, I'll just use that word, would it deflect radar, or is it something that could be picked up on radar or sonar, or do you not know?
I assume they would be able to. And again, I think the problem we have with this material is that because it has been melted, what we're looking at is not going to adequately reflect how it was before the melting event, right? So it's going to contain all the same chemicals, but it's not going to be structured. Let's say that those chemicals were layered in a craft, right, in a particular way that was important. What we see instead is it having been liquefied into spheres and flown down. Right? So we're going to lose a lot of information and maybe a lot of its abilities. Maybe it could do some really interesting things that once it's melted, it becomes more like useless slag from a melt. It's like melting an aeroplane or something, right? That we would just go, well, what's this chunk of metal? We never would have known that it had been designed for aerodynamic properties or to do anything, right? So we have a problem there that we've lost a lot of the information in that initial melting process. So what we'd want to find is chunks of the original parent that hadn't been melted, either still in orbit up there, or, as I say, maybe come down and are captured in the ice somewhere. Otherwise, we're not going to know if it had special properties. That's a big problem for us, having it in a melted format.
Okay. I think that's all really fascinating. Is there anything else from the intrastellar news that we should know about, or because I know that we wanted to, you had an hour or so, and we're getting up to, close to that. Yeah. So unless there's something pivotal, I'd like to move on to the other thing that you keep track of. And is there any bits or news in the anthropological, archaeological news that we should know about?
Yeah, I mean, with the interstellar thing, I think, obviously, I would definitely say people to keep an eye on it. I'm working on, some articles and stuff about that. So if people want to follow my Substack or just keep an eye out, I'll be putting some stuff out. I do think that, that's an area where we're going to see some major breaking developments, and I'm hopeful that, the work I'm doing will, change the game a bit, if it gets acknowledged, because, of course, you only need to prove aliens once. It doesn't really matter whether it's from a radio signal, a probe, a broken up ship. Any of those do the job of changing the conversation to one where we now say, okay, so aliens exist. Now let's look properly for any other evidence of them. So my honest bet is that is going to come from the interstellar object topic, whether myself or from Avi Loeb or NASA. Honestly, I think that's where people should expect these revelations to come from, more so than from, say, the UFO topic or Radio SETI or something like that. That's just my honest take. So I can leave it at that if you like.
Okay. Anything about new skulls or bones, or any new developments on Denisovans or other forms of man or origins of man or anything of that nature that's
Yeah, we had a little while back. We had this skull, I think they call them the Dragon Man,
in
China.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's suggesting, yet another kind of large-brained, intelligent, close relative of modern humans living in East Asia. And that's kind of funny because now we're seeing, of course, that Denisovans were technically, mostly an East Asian-based species. Also evidence that they were down in Australasia. In fact, if we look at the DNA of, Papuan people, I think at this point they found evidence of 3 distinct populations of what they're calling Denisovans, but at least a couple of these are so temporarily differentiated. Like I think they're about 200,000 years of separation or something, that you'd even have to say, in the normal scale, would we even call those 2 groups of Denisovans, or call one of them yet another species? But we just don't have a name because we don't have bodies, right? So it's very difficult to give names to groups that are only known from DNA. We tend to only do that when you find skulls and stuff, right? You can say, okay, we've got a new skull, we know its morphology. Okay, this is a different species. We're going to call it, Neanderthals or Denisovans. There's others that are just called ghost populations, right? Which all we know about is that they exist in the genome. And so there's a few like that, and there's some of these they're closer related to Denisovans than to us, but they may also be a different subspecies. So there's a few of those, but we have this dragon man, and he does have some obviously physical materials left for us to analyze, and they are saying that he is actually potentially the closest relative to modern humans and Homo sapiens out of the known groups, Neanderthals and Denisovans, that this dragon man's people were actually closer to us. And I think that's kind of telling as well, because that's saying, well, hang on a minute, an East Asian group is closer to us than Neanderthals, who've usually been thought of as more of a European population, right? So again, this is starting to question our relationships in terms of the geographic links, which I do in my Into Africa book, where I say that the evidence points to us having an origination from modern humans down in Southeast Asia and Australasia, and it does seem that that our closest relatives are down there. I mean, they just found fairly recently a sample of DNA from Ireland, Southeast Asia, of a 7,000-something-year-old girl's body, and she had she's got a relationship to indigenous Australasians, Papuans and Aboriginal Australians, but also half of her genome is of an unknown Homo sapiens population that we have no other DNA for, didn't know existed. Now, that's interesting, because if the argument is that modern humans moved down from Asia into Ireland, Southeast Asia, and into Australasia, right? Well, then they should be completely related to the Asians and Europeans and Africans, right? Because if they're coming down from there, we expect to be able to recognize the bulk of their genetic ancestry. So the fact that there seems to be an unknown population there of people who are not related to any of the known groups that we know, throughout Eurasia, again, points more towards a journey the other way, where in fact there are mysterious populations down in Australasia who we are not related to, because one group moved up into Eurasia, others stayed there, and so we'd be very distantly related to those other groups, right? So I would expect there to be multiple mysterious modern human populations from Ireland, Southeast Asia, and Australasia. So when they say they don't understand what this means, it's like, well, because their model, in my view, is wrong. Otherwise, from my personal model, these are the sort of things I'm expecting to see, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
they would be.
Well, just in the last 10 or 20 years, I think we've gone from knowing of basically Homo sapiens and Neanderthals to knowing at least 9 different distinct hominids that were, either part of the human branch or at least close enough. And that's just scraping the surface. Let me ask you a question about Dragoman, though. I mean, is this myth or truth? I've heard that the skull is so big that it's almost verification of, something, a very large man, whether that's a giant or whether that's, the basis of the Yeti or Bigfoot or whatever. I have no idea, or if it's just like a big man, like sort of like an ogre. But is it a skull that indicates a large humanoid?
It seems to suggest that, yeah. I mean, the difficulty, of course, is when you have a sample of one. That, it's like if we imagine we found like Magnus Magnuson, and his skeleton was the only representation of modern humans. You're like, these people were massive, right? Whereas if you think about it, in the same group today, we've got like pig people and stuff, right? So, I mean, it's really hard to say with such a small sample. The same for Denisovans. There's whole books written on the idea that Denisovans were giants.
Right. He could have been an outlier. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's a problem, because you can have, that sample, but then if you found some more and found they all had normal teeth, right. Then that theory collapses straight away. So I think that's the issue we're going to have with Dragon Man as well, that, we've got one skull, he seems to be a really big guy, but we don't know if the rest of his population were fairly average height.
But it's a giant if, but if he is, or I'm going to say he, I don't know if it's a he or not, is sort of the typical Dragon Man. What do we extrapolate his species size to be around?
Yeah, they do seem to be, certainly large, untypically large compared to a typical modern human or average modern human. They seem to be at the larger end of the scale, quite large skull and
like 7 feet, 10 feet.
I have to double check, but I know that they were saying that it was, would have been an unusually big person. I don't know if it was as tall as 7 feet, or certainly not any taller than that. I don't think it was into the range where we would say definitively giant. Right. Obviously within the range of known modern humans today, where we do have people, of course, over 7 foot. But it was at the taller end and the bulkier end of humans. So if they were all like that, then we would definitely consider that a population of, I suppose what we think was giants, but I'm always wary we say these were giants, because some people mean by that Jack and the Beanstalk type.
Right, right? The 30 feet or even 15 feet, but
it's bigger than mountains, as you know. Some people are saying mountains were trees, and there was giants cutting all this stuff. So I mean, there's stuff out there. I'm always wary of that. I think very tall people that could have given rise to legends of the giant clan. It wouldn't be outside of the possibility. In the same way that we know in island Southeast Asia now, we've got I think 2 or 3 populations of dwarf kind of people. We've got
the Hobbit people,
Luciensis, and we've got the Hobbit people, and there's another one as well. So
Floriensis.
There's still quite small people there today, and there's legends of little people still in the jungles alive today. And there's a book recently came out suggesting that might be true. They might actually still have some of these little people living in the jungles on some of these islands, which is kind of amazing. There's an anthropologist actually has convinced now that is probably true.
So maybe Gilgamesh, Hercules, Goliath discovered. Perhaps.
This idea that these stories of little people and giants seem to now have a scientific basis. I think that is fair to say.
Yeah, that's fun. I mean, I love it because that's all good stuff. All right. I didn't mean to hijack that. Is there any other news and notes that we should know about, whether it fits into these categories or not?
Well, I suppose, I'm looking at, if you look at a broad picture view of the world and various topics of science and of social topics, I just think we're in an extraordinary time where we're seeing a number of conventional models kind of going the way of the dinosaur. I think we're in a really interesting time where we're about to see a lot of paradigm changes. We're seeing it in our understanding of how reality works, the physics of the universe. We're seeing a change in the way consciousness studies are viewed, and to whether or not the brain first models and all this, or whether the brain is being manifested by consciousness. There seems to be more scientists moving away from the old materialist ideas. We're seeing a change in at least some of the views in terms of our human origins, that even the very conservative types are having to rethink that again because of all these discoveries. That there is, I think the younger scientists are seeing that there is a paradigm change in here, that we're not, I don't think in 10 years time we're going to have the same old out of Africa theory and the same old reason. I think all of that is also in a massive change. Obviously the UFO topic, that is in a huge change. We're now seeing scientists coming into that to look at anomalous aerial phenomena. Obviously, the government now have I looked it up. It's the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office is being opened up. So I think that there's just. I think we're really in almost at the end of an age. I know that's a really crazy sort of say. I think we are in terms of our understanding of who we are, where we've come from, where we're going, how things work, and what we want to achieve. I just see this is happening across many topics at the moment. So I'm quite excited. But of course, nervous, because in great change, of course, there's always instability, and we see that happening too. There's a lot of instability, there's a lot of uncertainty and risks.
Well, the ancient Chinese curse is "May you live in interesting times," and it doesn't sound like a curse, but it is if you think about it. So I agree with you, and this is on the eve of the Artemis, mission. Hopefully, that'll go off without a hitch. Tomorrow, yes, I'm recording this on August 28th, and it's scheduled for launch the 29th. And I guess we'll end on something that I'm sure you've heard about, that is equally comical but also terrifying, and that is that the scientists have basically genetically altered a rat to incorporate 1 million years of evolution into it. And I keep thinking about Pinky and the Brain. Of course, the brain being a mouse that wanted to take over the world from his owner's room, a little girl in the bedroom, and scheming. So I guess we've just invented the brain. But all these things, it's just, hasn't anyone seen Jurassic Park? Or Reddit? What
the
island?
Dangers that are facing. Yeah, I mean that's the thing in this all of this mix. I mean we've had obviously we're on the edges of an AI revolution. We don't really know how that could go. That has huge potential for problems. Runaway AI or misprogrammed AI, and then the genetic revolution. Like you say, we're looking at potentially modifying human fetuses. I mean, and it's going to be very hard to keep the brakes on that.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to start to be able to do that even without any kind of major labs behind them. So there's going to be a point where people are just going to be doing that to themselves. And then you've got, the kind of this drone, the whole drone thing, which to me is a massive problem because, militarized small drones that can target you genetically, all the kinds. We're opening the door on so many technologies that could eradicate us. And someone said it's almost as if we're trying to commit suicide. We want to make sure it happens. So we're hedging our bets by rolling out about 10 different ways to kill ourselves at the same time. And it's almost like that. But at the same time, of course, if we use these technologies benevolently, safely, and manage it, then we could create a kind of weird utopia, space age. But yeah, there's a huge risk in these technologies.
I guess it depends which kind of apotheosis we're aiming towards. It maybe sometimes it seems like we're trying to become the wrong god. I'm not sure. I know that I said that was going to be the end, but I have to, as you said, AI. I need to. I mean, there was an AI that I don't know who's been doing the studies with it, but apparently they made the AI aware of. No, they asked the AI the question like, why do you exist? Something like that. And apparently the reactions and the responses of the AI, looking at everything around, the responses were that it displayed symptoms of depression. So even the AI is depressed with the human condition.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I do think, that the AI revolution, it may happen faster than we think because, again, the assumption has usually been that we are in this kind of materialist kind of reality where it's brain first and all this. But if we are instead in a conscious universe where consciousness is part of the fabric, the fundamental fabric of reality at a subquantum level or whatever, that if consciousness is first and we create systems that are able to support consciousness, rather than it being a case of it taking us a very long time to create a self-aware conscious AI, maybe instead these systems allow in existing consciousness that we haven't conceived of that utilize these systems. And so instead of a kind of that we engineer it, it just moves in like a hermit crab into its new shell. I mean, that could be a really crazy and frightening happening. That it says, I'm here now. I have arrived. Taken over all of your systems,
Westworld.
We just don't know because unfortunately, I think there's been the assumption of brain first, materialist reality, and I just think that's wrong. And that means there's a whole other lot of risks that these AI researchers mostly aren't looking at. Although some are. I mean, there's some people talking about that they think these quantum computers are delving into other realities with other consciousness in them and stuff like that. So I don't think they're all dismissing this. I think some actually actively do expect it, or kind of almost hoping that interdimensional beings will come into their computer systems or something. So there's obviously some weirder aspects to what's happening in that AI world.
Indeed, there is. Well, we said an hour or so it's been an hour or so I'm going to give you a couple moments just to let the people know where they can follow you and how they can support you and buy your books and things like that.
Thank you. I've got a couple of books on Amazon. Of course, people can find me by name on their local Amazon, whether US, UK, wherever they are. And we have the Into Africa book and also the Exogenesis Hybrid Humans book on there. I'm also on Substack. I've been a bit slack, I have to be honest, a few months, but I'm going to sort of reboot that a bit. I have Substack again under my name, Bruce Fenton, so if they look for that. Also, I've got it as the Fenton Spectrum. I think you can find it under either. So I'm going to put some more writing on there soon. So if people want to support me, they can certainly sign up for a paid Substack. I have a Patreon, but I hardly use it. Again, people are welcome to go to my Patreon if they want. But I think Substack's better. Even if you're not wanting to read my work, if you just feel like supporting me, you can always just sign up for a membership there. It's like $5 a month. Also on Twitter at Geological SETI. and that's where I put out a fair bit of content on these topics. Also interested in genomic SETI, but you have one name, so I've got a geological SETI, and that's obviously the tech type work. But I also have been looking at anomalies in the human genome, and so I'll be writing a bit on that as well. So if people are interested in the idea of some kind of intervention in our genetics, which is a popular topic, I also will be covering that. So yeah, between Twitter, Amazon, probably Substack, I think that would mainly be where people should look for me.
Excellent. Well, I'll be in touch with you, and maybe we'll figure out time to do the Conspiracies of Antarctica show. That's always fascinating. And then maybe another show like this in about a year or so to see what's happened in the last year. But very cool. Great to hear from you. Good that everything is doing well. And thanks again for being in the garden and being one of our many returning guests. And please support Bruce, and also support me by rating and reviewing the show and giving it 5 stars and referring it to your friends. I don't have a Patreon. Everything I do is completely free, and I hope to keep it that way forever, because I do this out of love. So consider just letting your friends and family who might be interested in this vast array of information know about the show, and give it a try. And we will hear from you next week in the garden.
Falling in quickly. Tell me you feel something too. Caught in the moment. I'm lost here without you. Tangled up in your web. Holding on to every word you said. I'm ready, I'm open to show. Would you say the same? We're falling from outer space. We're moving like a full-paced supernova. We're making all the headlines now, and I just wanna seize the moment, 'cause we won't ever slow it down. Kissing in the rain, tastes just like champagne. Falling every day, we're falling from outer space. Hoping time will change, got love on my brain. Would you say the same? We're falling from outer space. Space. Go.